Um,
Uh,
could you also promote Maddie to a participant, a panelist?
uh, Madeline Phelps? Yeah. Or Phillips? Okay. All right, well, good evening, and thank you all, committee members. We're going to be doing introductions here shortly, but until then, I wanted to kick things off by welcoming everybody to our first ODELL Advisory Committee meeting for Phase 2 of the ODELL Unincorporated Community Plan Project. For those in the benefit, or for the benefit of those in our audience and those who are watching from home, this committee is made up of the County Planning Commission, together with 4 ODELL community members who were appointed earlier this year by the Hood County Board of Commissioners. To our 4 appointed members, if you could raise your hand, like there's just one in the house, and then Sarah's online, Ken. Um, so thank you for your interest in this project and your willingness to be involved. And to our planning commissioners, go ahead and raise your hands. Um, I know I didn't really give you a choice, but thanks you for agreeing to participate in this process. I think being able to learn from your planning experience will definitely be helpful to this process, and will help the other committee members as well. Um, as mentioned, we do have folks in the audience, and we also have folks who are probably in online. And this is a an advisory committee. It's open to the public, but we're not soliciting any public comment as part of tonight's meeting. This project is being funded through a housing planning assistance grant that was awarded to the county by the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development, also known as DLCD. The grant requires that the work be completed by May of 2027. And so we have a lot of work ahead of us and a short time to get it all done. We are currently in phase 2 of hopefully a 2-phase project. The first phase, which was completed in May of 2025, involved a housing needs analysis, a public facilities assessment, and a consideration of future community boundary locations. And all of that information is going to be used as a foundation as we dive into phase 2. We have the consulting firm Echo Northwest, who was hired to complete phase 1. And we are fortunate enough to have both Beth and Scott back to lead us in phase 2. And so with that, I will turn things over to Beth and Scott, who are obviously joining us tonight virtually.
Thank you so much for having us here. Scott, do you want to put up the PowerPoint so we can start going through it? So we are here to talk about the ODELL Urban Unincorporated Community Plan Project. Um, and obviously, this is the advisory committee, and this is committee meeting number 1. During tonight's meeting, we're going to review the project background and some goals. And I think that Scott is working on getting the PowerPoint up. We're going to do introductions in a few minutes, as Eric mentioned. We're going to talk about what's already been done. And then we're going to talk about what's being asked of you, and then we'll have some discussion with you. So there's a fair bit of where we'll be talking to you a little bit. If you have questions as we go along, I think we'd like to take the questions so that clarifying questions, so that you aren't in suspense, wondering what we're talking about. Scott, do you need me to put up the PowerPoint?
No, I got it. It's just like when you have all these monitors, you're not seeing the full presentation mode, are you?
No, no.
Yeah, share again. Take
Okay,
this one. How about now?
that's perfect. And if you go to the next slide and the one after that. So what we're going to be looking at on this next slide is the project schedule. So as Eric mentioned, this project runs through May of 2027. Can you go to the next slide, Scott? This project runs through May of 2027. We anticipate having 4 meetings with the advisory committee here in August, again, sometime around October or so, early in the new year, and then a little later on towards March. We are doing a certain amount of stakeholder outreach. That includes some focus groups and interviews that we'll be doing, as well as an open house. And I'll get Scott to remind us of when the open house is. I think it's September 20. You have to unmute yourself, Scott.
30th.
September 30th. Okay. And that's open to the public. We'll be discussing some of the same questions that we're discussing here. And we're hoping to hear from the broader public at that point. The focus groups and interviews are around the Latino community as to make sure that we're getting input from that. We're also working on developing the unincorporated community plan, which I'll describe in a little bit more detail. And then at the end of the project, we'll have more engagement to discuss what is in the draft plan, as well as get additional feedback. We'll have some meetings with the Board of Commissioners as we're going along to get input from them. So that's basically our schedule, and we need to be done by the end of May. And the next slide, please. So why are we here and what are we trying to do? Well, the Oregon legislature required Hood River to establish an urban unincorporated community boundary in ODELL through periodic review back in 2024. So that's a lot of planning jargon, but essentially the state was asking I'll get to you in a moment, Sarah. The state was asking the county to establish this unincorporated community back in 2004. And for a variety of reasons, which I'd rather leave Eric to talk about, if you guys are curious, that plan did not go through at that point. The Board of Commissioners in their 2023 to 25 strategic report included a goal about diversifying housing and affordability within the county. And one of those actions under that was about supporting urbanization. In other words, developing an urban unincorporated community plan and getting it adopted for ODELL and Parkdale. Sarah, you had a question.
Just a clarifying question on the open house. I had it on my calendar on the 28th. Did that shift?
You know, I think you're right. I think it is September 28th. But perhaps we'll ask Eric to confirm that with us.
Okay, just at some point. Thank you.
Yes, Monday, September 28th is the open house.
Thanks.
Okay.
While I'm sharing right now, I can't click on other slides and files, but I'll make a
That's
note
right.
of all of it.
All right, September 28th. So one of the things you might ask is what's an urban unincorporated community plan? It will become part of Hood River County's comprehensive plan, which is the plan for how will Hood River County grow and be managed in terms of planning over the long term. So it'll be a part of that. It essentially sets a boundary for what is ODELL as a community. And it includes policies that are specific to ODELL, such as zoning policies. So zones that are specific to ODELL. If you go on to the next slide, we'll talk more about what the unincorporated community plan is as we go along. But here are the goals of the project. And Eric, it would probably be helpful if you walk through these goals and how they're meaningful for the county and the Board of Commissioners.
Yes, thank you, Beth. So as part of this project, the county has identified 5 goals, overarching goals. The first goal is to engage the community by using focused outreach to get local residents involved and to help form the community plan. And this advisory committee is an example of community involvement. We will also, what you'll also hear about later is that we will also be engaging the community through 2 open houses, including one next month, as was mentioned. We have Latino-focused listening sessions. We have an engagement, a community engagement survey that we'll be sending out, public hearings, and so forth. And so the second goal is to develop findings in order to support one of the 2 boundary options identified as part of phase one. As will be discussed later, in order to connect two existing separate exception areas that currently make up the ODELL community, the county will need to justify a new goal exception to rezone certain exclusive farm use zone land located in between, but with the primary goal of avoiding land that is in commercial orchard production. The third goal is to develop findings to support the ODELL community plan and incorporate it into the county's larger comprehensive plan. And frankly, a lot of that work has already been completed during phase one with the creation of the ODELL Housing and Public Facilities Report, which we will be referring to often as part of this process. The fourth goal is to identify strategic code changes to support housing policies identified as part of phase one, as part of the phase one report. This could come in the form of increased housing density, such as reduced minimum lot sizes. And it could also come in the form of the types of housing that are allowed within planned residential areas, including such housing types as duplexes, accessory dwelling units, and maybe some multifamily housing. And then the fifth and final goal is to complete a final urban unincorporated community plan for ODELL that would be presented, hopefully next spring, for adoption by the board as is required by state law.
So we'll be talking about an awful lot of what Eric just mentioned right there, and demystifying some of the planning speak for those of you who don't work a lot in planning issues. So we'll go through an awful lot of this in a few minutes. Eric, you will pause me if there's questions in the room.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So engagement in the projects is pretty important. We've mentioned it a few times here. Here we're showing you the kind of engagement we did in phase one and what we're doing in phase two. So again, we have two open houses, one at the beginning of the project and one towards the end. The same thing with the focus groups. We've got our advisory committee who we'll be talking to with you all. We've got some Board of Commissioner meetings and one Planning Commission meeting. We've also got a community survey that, Eric, can you remind me when the community survey is expected to go out?
Sure. The goal is to get it out by around at the latest, the middle of September, so that we have it out and it's being hopefully worked on. And so people who come to the open house can deliver their surveys. Hopefully they'll be doing it online, but if they want to, they can do it that night. Yes.
Will this group have any input on the surveys that go out or be able to review it prior to doing so?
Unfortunately, no. And I apologize just because that would maybe we should have thought of that earlier, but we've had to go through a process in order to identify the survey questions, and then we've been working with the Nextdoor Inc. to get those survey questions translated and in plain language. And so we've been working the last several weeks on working with them to get that. And so we've got it pretty well finalized. And so at this point, it would be a heavy lift to kind of change those questions, but sorry about that. Yes.
What geographic area will the survey be sent to? Just ODELL specifically, or the whole county? Or?
Definitely not the whole county. What we are doing is we've identified, we're utilizing kind of ODELL sewer district boundary as kind of the gauge that includes all of the areas that we'll be talking about that will be that are already either in the exception areas of ODELL or could be up for consideration as being within the boundary, and then some areas that are a little bit beyond that. The engagement survey, so that's who will be mailed a copy of the survey and a copy of the invite to the open house. But we're also advertising the open house. We have a list of folks who are on the ODELL email list, and it's about 175 people so far that have signed up. So we'll be providing that survey to those folks as well. But we don't want to send it to the entire county because, one, we're trying to focus on the ODELL area. Thank you. That helps. Thanks.
on to the next slide, please. And we've covered everything on this slide other than the fact that we'll be talking some to your public service providers. So Crystal Springs Water District, the Odell Sanitary District, and if needed, the Hood River School District. We've talked to them before, but we'll be talking to them again as we need to. So on to the next slide.
Beth, there's a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For the focus or the open houses and the community survey,
Mm-hmm.
do you have like example questions? Are the questions like in a way that if the majority of people were to answer them in a certain way, then something would change? Or are you guys just trying to get a gauge on how people are feeling about it? Or like, what's the purpose of the survey? Or is it just kind of like checking off the boxes that we did the thing to make the community feel like they were involved?
Well, we did not do an engagement survey in phase one. And what we heard from the board and the community was we would like an opportunity to, that's another way that we can get our voice heard. So we have been working closely with our consultants, with the next door to come up with a series of questions. And so I'm not sure, Beth, you have a better response on as far as these questions and a
The
reminder.
survey's really about housing needs. It's hearing a little broader from the community what kind of housing you need and what kind of opportunities for housing you need. So it really focuses around those types of issues. The questions at the open house, some of them will be pretty similar to the questions we'll be discussing here. And what will he do with the information? Well, we'll provide the results of it and a summary of what we've heard to the Board of Commissioners. And in the end, the Board of Commissioners is the decision maker.
Another question?
Will there be a way to, so it's going out by email and snail mail. Is there a way for people that don't have access to one of those that are part of the community to fill it out, like a QR code at the public school or something like that?
Yes, good question. So we are embedding a QR code into the survey. The hope is that most people will utilize that. We have it's called Survey 123, where it gets digitized into it's a component of our GIS system, to where we are able to run analytics based on the input that we receive from that. For those people who don't have the ability to do so, we will take paper copies. We're sending these out to landowners because those are the folks who we have addresses for. We also have some addresses for, like, say, the Odell Mobile Home Park, because folks own the home, even though they may not own the land. So we do have their addresses. And then we are working with the Next Door Inc. to, part of the contract that we have with them is to go out and to go door to door to places where we believe that renters are, to engage folks at local places of employment. So that's really the focus, and we're trying, that's kind of what we thought is the best way to try to touch everybody. And Beth and Scott can fill in the blanks if necessary.
One more question on
Yes.
that. I guess what I'm asking is, will there be a spot if somebody that doesn't fall into that category, one of those categories, can pick up a survey to fill out so they don't fall through the cracks? I mean, you could be a renter but not be at home. You could be engaged in the community but not have an address there. I feel like it's important for those people to have an opportunity to weigh in at some point.
And so what would you suggest is the best way to find those folks?
I mean, I guess my suggestion is like have a version that is, you don't want to make it available to everybody in the county, but I'm thinking like the school. Go to Mid Valley Elementary, you can pick up a copy of the form if you really feel like you fit the bucket of you're an engaged community member, but you don't necessarily, maybe there's two people in a household and one person fills it out and the other person has a completely different vision on it. Allow them the opportunity to have a voice in that.
Sure.
So I don't know how to do it, and maybe a paper copy at the school or post office or something.
And I think that we have talked about that. Is that correct, Beth?
I want to revisit that, but the point is taken, and I think we can make that happen. I think that's something we should just take away and talk about amongst ourselves.
Liliana?
I have a quick question. So if I'm understanding correctly, will be the Odell sanitary or will be used to get paper copies mailed out, and for people who speak other language other than English, like will there be also will they get the translation of the survey, or will it only be in one, like in English?
We've also got a Spanish version of the survey.
So both of them will be available at the same time.
Everything that we are mailing out is both in English and Spanish. We're working with the Nextdoor Inc. To translate everything and to put it in plain language. So hopefully, we speak in plainer language that the average person may not understand. And so we want to make sure that it's stated in a way that everybody can understand.
Sorry, one more question on
Yes.
that. Just being sensitive to the variety of people that would be responding to that. Is there a way that it doesn't look like an official document, which would deter people from filling it out? Maybe like, hey, heads up, this thing's coming, like a postcard that's easy to read. You don't have to open it up. Heads up, this thing's coming in the mail. We'd like you to fill it out. It's for these reasons. And it doesn't look like an official piece of mail from the county, or people aren't surprised by that. They know it's coming. Sorry, I'm complicated. Thing.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's one of those where I'm just, from a county standpoint, it's, there's a cost with everything. And what we have planned out, what we've prepared so far is 600 envelopes already packaged up, ready to be, the information put into and mailed out. We can certainly, if that's the focus, we can certainly look at budgets. We have a tight budget. But we are proposing a postcard within the envelope. And within the envelope is the survey. It's about I think it's going to be 4 pages, 2 in English, 2 in Spanish. And then we are proposing a card for the invite to the open house on the 28th.
I don't know if this is, if this is something that the Nextdoor will be doing, or if this is something that could be taken in consideration, but with what John was mentioning, I'm just thinking about like many of us use the stores in Odell, and like maybe having like a poster or some type of flyer. I don't know how many of us actually look at the, the poster section with so many flyers there, but that could also be an opportunity in both languages, or also like other services, like when we go pay our electricity bill or the sewer, water.
Great. We can do this.
Okay, I'm gonna take us on to the role of the pack, which is partially do what you've just been doing. So we're going to meet a few times during the plan. Our schedule set 4. This one says 3. We'll get that ironed out there. I apologize about that. You're bringing your local knowledge, so you know a lot more than we do about your community. And those of you who don't live in Odell, you live a lot closer than we do. Reviewing information about existing conditions, opportunities, constraints. So some of that is reviewing the work we did for phase 1. We'll be discussing the boundary evaluation, options and trade-offs with you, and we'll hear what you're saying there. Advise the project team on whether the proposed plan reflects Odell's needs and priorities. We're looking to you for that kind of advice, and serve as a connection between the project and the broader Odell community. Those of you who live in and around Odell or have businesses in Odell, certainly one of the things you can help do is mention to people that, hey, the county is doing a survey. It's for this purpose. There's this open house. Uh, help spread the word essentially. The committee is advisory and final decisions will be made through the county's public review and adoption process. In other words, by the Board of Commissioners. But we certainly want to hear your advice. Next slide. So let's go do introductions. Your name and your organization you represent, your insight or expertise and local knowledge that you bring to the table, what's something that you love about the ODELL community, and aim for 1 minute per person. So I'll start. I'm Beth Goodman with Echo Northwest. I'm the project director on this. I bring expertise and insight about planning, housing planning, doing the kind of technical work we're talking about here. And honestly, I love the orchards around ODELL. It's such a beautiful place. And I love Hood River County. Shall we go to Scott and then Sarah and then go around the room?
Hi all.
Good.
My name is Scott Goodman. I'm a project manager here at Echo Northwest. I've got some experience around housing, but I was also a teacher in my former life, and so I like to bring some of that experience into this project type of work. I was a Spanish teacher as well, so some of my Spanish languages come in handy for some of the work that we are doing. And something I love about the ODELL area, I'm myself from a pretty rural sort of place and have a strong feeling for supporting rural communities throughout the state. And so this is a very strong place in my heart for doing this type of work.
Me?
Yes, please.
First, I want to apologize for not being in the room. I had a last minute change in plans. I was on vacation and my return time didn't suit the meeting. So I apologize for that. I'm Sarah Duckwall and I work in ODELL and representing Duckwall Fruit, which is one of the larger employers in the community. We have been in ODELL since the 1950s. So we have made it our employment home and we employ a lot of community members. And so we like to be present when our community is affected. And this is an instance where it is both for our employees and for ourselves. And I love the community feel of ODELL and just being able to be part of that small community. Thank you.
Eric, do you want to direct us around the room?
Sure. Commissioner Kitts, are you ready?
I'm Josh Kitts. I'm one of the planning commissioners. I've lived here since I was 1. I have a business downtown and my parents have the ice cream store downtown. And I just love the valley and I'm like super keen to try and make sure that people can live here who aren't millionaires. And so I'm excited for an opportunity to try and help figure that out. And that's my focus.
John Celtic-Garrett, planning commissioner. My family's been in the valley since about 1910, specifically in the ODELL area, so I'm very familiar with that. Been on the planning commission for more years than I remember, so I don't know how many, more than 8, less than 15. And I grew up working at my uncle's gas station in ODELL, and have spent a lot of my time there. And so it's very near and dear to me. And it's nice to see one place in the valley that's still not totally gentrified. And this is a great opportunity for us to create future housing solutions for the people that are here now and the people that will be here and working in our community in the future.
I am Ryland Moore. I'm a planning commissioner and a farm and ranch broker. I am not from Hood River. I moved here in 2011. My wife's family is from Hood River. And my background is in land use planning and I have a master's degree in planning and really focused on urban and rural interfaces and the diversity. I love the diversity in Odell, and I love everything about it, the views, the fairgrounds, the cultures. Yeah.
My name is Juan Reyes. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm representing a lot of ACE programs, but I would say I own a consulting business, in Cultura Consulting, which actually does Latino outreach coordination, translations, interpretations, making sure that every community member has access to resources that are part of our community, which has been amazing to be able to be a part of this as part of that work as well. I would say the expertise that I bring, I have 13 years of assessment experience with the county. So I'm very familiar with assessment rules, statutes, work closely with planning in my time here with the county. Being able to bring that knowledge into these conversations, I hope will be very helpful. And also just being able to make sure that the community, everybody in the community has a voice and is able to get the information in real time and is able to understand everything when they're making decisions, I think will be really helpful. The one thing I love about ODELL is just the community itself. Everybody's so close knit. Everybody is just, it's an amazing example of what people can do when they come together. I've been very fortunate to live there for the last 24 years, and my girls have been born and raised in Hood River. So, yeah.
Merrick Von Lipkin, I'm the chair of the Plan Commission, orchardist in the valley, multi-generational, also own an orchard in the Odell area. Just trying to figure out how to make a responsible growth pattern for the valley to be able to keep working people employed and also provide housing.
Great. So I'm Eric Walker. I serve the county as the community development director. I've worked for the county for almost 29 years. Most of that time as a land use planner, but for the last 8 years as its director. I was actually born and raised in Hood River. Actually grew up on the outskirts of Odell. And my wife and I continue to live in the Odell area. For me, it's the thing that I love about Odell is that just the personal history, the aesthetics. It's a familiar place to myself, just having grown up there and knowing a lot of the community members, and in some cases, multiple generations from the community. And so for me, Odell provides a kind of a sense of home, and memories of that area bring some level of comfort to me. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liliana Lachino. I am a Odell resident, but also I work at the next door. And the insight I bring, I work a lot with community engagement with the community, especially the Latino community. So I bring a lot of expertise with community engagement. And something that I love about I was also raised in Hood River, born and raised in Hood River, and I grew up in this area. I really love the views, especially in the spring. But one thing I really like about Odell, especially moving from the Dells back to the area, has definitely been the connection in our school, and also the events that get put together by community, and also seeing businesses come together for our community.
My name is Jay Lyman. I am a planning commissioner at large for the whole county. I am a retired civil engineer and economist, and I guess what I bring in terms of technical background is almost 40 years of doing planning work related to the Oregon land use system, as well as other states, but worked all over the state of Oregon, doing transportation related planning primarily, but that brings you to the table with population forecasts and employment forecasts and a lot of other pieces that are very relevant. Much like Eric said, I think my interest is in Odell is one. I think it's in some ways it's the heart of the community, of the agricultural community. But what I would love to see is a plan that allows the community to go forward with jobs and affordable housing that meets the needs of the workers in the region.
My name's Kira Guisto. I am a lawyer here in Hood River. And my husband and I own and farm, will own 80 acres in Odell. We live in Odell. Our kids go to Mid Valley Elementary. And so I believe I'm the Odell representative for the Planning Commission. And so we're very connected to the Odell community through the school and through where we live and farm. And one of the many things I love about Odell is that it's the farming hub of the Hood River Valley, and it's kind of, you know, the roots of Hood River, truly. So.
My name is Jamie Loomis. I'm a planning commissioner as well. Live just outside of the Odell proper itself as we have for 4 generations. Orchardists. My great grandparents moved to the Odell area in the early teens. I've lived all over the country, East Coast, Midwest. The one thing I love about Odell is I moved back several years ago, and it's just always been one of those places that's been home. Not a lot of people can go to the same school that their grandfather went to and their mother went to, and you know, we live now 2 miles down the road from where my great grandparents, you know, got married and lived when they, you know, first came out this direction. So it would be nice to see that area planned for the next 4 generations as I look at it, and be a place where I know that my kids and my great grandkids and grandkids can both afford to live and work in the community.
I'm Ken Go, Odell resident. Lived there over 60 years. Our family started farming there over 100 years. And I feel that this is going to be a pretty good challenge to keep a really good balance, you know, with the farms that are, you know, already in place, and also for expansion for housing. And I think it's going to be a challenge, and I'm up for a challenge. I'd like to be part of it. So I think, you know, we got a good group put together, and you know, I have a lot of, I've always said that, you know, it's family's not just blood. We have a lot of employees that are our family, you know, and we house a lot of our own employees on our farm, but I know there's a big need for housing in the Odell area. And like I said, it's tough in this valley in general to say affordable housing. I've heard that a lot. It's pretty relative because Hood River is so expensive. So it's going to be a challenge. So I'm up for it.
Thank you. All right, I think we've got everybody, Beth.
All right, I'm going to turn it over in one moment to Scott to tell you some about what we learned in phase 1 of the project. I'll just mention, you guys have mentioned a number of times living and working in Odell, and that is in a lot of ways the keys of what we're talking about here. How do we look at opportunities for people to live and work in Odell as well as living in Odell? So, all right, so Scott, you want to take it away on the next section?
Yeah, hopefully folks can hear me all right. I will first start out by saying that was a very heartwarming introduction of folks' connection. That sounds like we have an ideal project advisory committee with local knowledge, experience, some people that we got our planners in here as well. Love hearing about that. I'm going to go over some of the data side of things that we'd gone through in the phase 1 of the report. Eric had sent an email that included agenda, but we'll also have a bunch of this information as well that was from the housing and facilities report, which lays out in much greater detail everything that I'm going to go through, but I will end up giving you sort of the greatest hits of it. Let's see where. So to start out, overall, what an urban unincorporated community is, that's an existing community outside of an urban growth boundary. So one of the things that means that it is not creating a new city. This is something that has come up a couple different times and is very important that we just make sure we clarify it. There is no new city that is happening. It is not expanding AUGB. It is its own sort of category that fits within the county. So it is planned by the county and it allows limited growth where it is justified, which is what this whole project is about. And it requires findings under Oregon statewide planning goals, which are these exceptions that we will end up doing findings and exceptions about that become the formal adoption process. One thing that we want to mention as well, this is not a unique case to Odell. There's other urban unincorporated communities throughout the state. There's about 20 of them total, but what we found is some of the more relevant ones for Odell include Government Camp, White City, and Charleston, which have some similar things around economic bases that are fueling the need for additional housing. So, as I'd said, I'm going to go over some of the existing conditions that we had talked about, which means what's your community according to the data, housing, employment. We'll get into capacity, infrastructure, and opportunities and constraints that go into that are all affecting Odell's future. So to start out at one of the most basic levels of things has to do with the population. Odell is growing faster than the county and the state. And the county itself is growing faster than the state, but Odell is growing even faster than that at a 2.2% annual growth rate, average annual growth rate. And so even when you look at 2000 to 2022, that's a 62% increase overall. And that rate is actually, if you were to compare it to 2010 to 2022, it's even faster than that. So growing population. And then we get into, all right, let's compare this a little more around demographics to the county. So to start out, Odell is younger than the county overall. The median age in Odell is 27 versus 40 for the county. And when you look at that change over time, Odell is actually having a younger median age, whereas the state and the county overall are getting older. Next up, average household size. As you can see here, Odell has more households with 3 or more people in them when compared to the county and the state. And the share of population by race and ethnicity, as you all know, Odell has a larger Latino population than the county, at about 2/3 of the population being Hispanic or Latino. And so when we start to look at the idea of demographics, that's one thing. As you mentioned, we want to look at what's going on with the housing in Odell. And so when we look at the housing mix, what we are seeing is almost the entirety of Odell's housing stock is either single family detached at 59% or mobile home at 39%. This is very different than the county and the state. The housing tenure, meaning do you rent or own, is showing that about 93% of Odell's housing stock is ownership, implying, well, what's left for the rental options and are those affordable? I think you had all alluded to this. You know the answer to this. No, it is not affordable largely. Median household incomes, when we're looking at Hood River County, increased 42% between 2012 and 2022. When you look at the increase in median home sale prices, that went up by 145% during that same period, meaning the cost of housing is getting further away for your average incomes. While the data for Odell itself isn't as good, just because there's not as many transaction details that we can track, to the best of the data's availability to us, we show Odell itself has a median household income of $83,000. At that income, you could afford a house for about $200,000 without being housing cost burden. As you know, that is not what houses are selling for in Odell. The median home sale price that we are seeing is closer to $463,000 in Odell. So we talked about demographics. We've talked a little bit about housing. There's also the role of employment. We have wonderful employers, some of which are represented here on the advisory committee. Local employment, as we know, is centered around the fruit packing industry, including Duckwall Fruit, Diamond Fruit Growers, Mount Adams Fruit, but there's also additional employers like Cardinal Glass, the schools, utilities, and local businesses. What the chart on the right here is showing is the commute flows for the census designated place for Odell, which isn't a perfect boundary for Odell, but it's how data is tracked at this level. And that's showing that 1,000 people about work in Odell. Of those, only 15% of them also live in Odell. So this arrow pointing out of 1,063 means how many residents of Odell are leaving for work, meaning they don't have a house in Odell. So that is a quick run through of data. As I'd shared at the beginning, you should have received the housing and facilities report, which has all this information and more in much greater detail as well.
I'm going to correct you on one thing. It's 186 people coming into Odell for work. They don't have a house in Odell. 1,063 people who live in Odell going somewhere else for work. You just said a little bit of the opposite as you were talking. I'm sorry.
Sorry for mincing my words. Thank you for the correction, Beth.
No worries.
I was trying to go through quick.
I know. Are there any questions before we go on?
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, no questions.
Yeah.
Real quickly.
Go ahead.
Would it be possible to just give a quick, like, 30-second brief on the difference between like city, county, and unincorporated rural community for the public so that they kind of understand how Odell fits in between those two different jurisdictions?
Eric, would you like to do that or would you like me to?
I'll take a crack at it. You said the difference between city,
County and unincorporated rural community.
What are the differences there?
Yeah, like how does Odell fit into those two categories that people understand, generally speaking?
Yeah. So the Oregon Statewide Planning Program is based on, there's a lot of factors. There's 19 goals, 14 that apply in Hood River County. One of the goals is urbanization, and under urbanization, the idea is that you would focus your development in your urban areas, your urban growth areas, your cities. First and foremost, that's where you direct, and then cities have the opportunity to plan and grow. And that's why you have urban growth areas outside of city limits, which is an area where you know that you have the opportunity to grow into over time. Cities have to plan for that. There's a 20-year land supply, so on and so forth. Then we have our rural lands. There's a lot of different uses in our rural lands. We have resource lands like farm and forest zone properties, which make up the majority of our rural lands. We also have some areas where exceptions were taken where you have rural residential development where larger minimum lot size, anything between 2 acres and 10 acres. And then, so that makes up kind of the rural areas. And a couple areas you have some rural commercial and rural industrial, but those are few and far between. And then you have our urban unincorporated, or you have unincorporated communities, and there's different types of unincorporated communities. There's rural communities, there's urban communities, there's rural centers, there's resort areas, and so they're all covered under the law. And so in this case, Odell, as mentioned, is an urban unincorporated community. And the reason it's urban is because it's met the state's threshold for the number of houses that you have to have. I think as long as you have at least 150 houses within that enclave of exception area, then you have the potential to qualify. And then there's also factors of like you have commercial industrial development within your community, as well as like public spaces like schools and churches and so forth. So does that?
Yeah, I guess the only other clarification be that an urban unincorporated community isn't like a city where it has a city council or a county where it has a board of directors and a planning commission. It's under the jurisdiction of the county.
That's exactly right. Yes, excellent point. And that was what Scott mentioned earlier, is that we're not going through this process to make Odell a city. Where it have its own jurisdiction, like the city of Hood River or the city of Cascade Locks. It would still remain under the county's jurisdiction, and essentially right now it has urban types of services like water and sewer, but those are not provided by the municipality. They're provided by, sewer and water districts, special districts.
Thanks for the clarification. That's helpful.
I think there was another question in the room.
I don't think so.
Well, we'll go on to me. So here's the geography of ODELL. So we keep talking about this concept of exceptions areas, and what does that mean? Well, as Eric mentioned, Oregon has 19 land use goals, and when you have what we call an exception area like ODELL, which is the boundary that you're seeing in on the screen inside with the white and the colors, so not the gray. That's an exception in this case to farm and forest, mostly farm, of course, as well as exceptions for allowing municipal water and sewer. So you've got water and sewer districts here. If you didn't have exceptions to those goals, then ODELL couldn't exist the way it exists. Basically, the Oregon land use system came in, it came in as in the 1970s and in the early 80s. And you had some communities that were not going to become cities, that weren't going to become their own urban growth boundaries, but operated as communities the way that ODELL does. And those areas oftentimes generally have exceptions. So what we're talking about throughout this project really is continuing that tradition of exceptions and making ODELL into more of a complete community when you talk geographically, as well as the types of uses that are allowed in ODELL. So housing, commercial uses, industrial uses, those kind of things. So in ODELL currently, we've got what I'll call here legacy zoning. So this is zoning that was in place before 2000 that would allow, say, 7,500 square foot lots. And a fair bit of ODELL is developed with that kind of thing. Except in 2000, some of the state rules changed. And now, since you don't have an urban unincorporated community designation, the thing we're trying to do here, you've got 2-acre minimum lot sizes. All of the areas that are shown here in color, the hot colors, the yellow, the red, the orange, those are all zoned for housing, where you could do 2-acre minimums. All of the colors there are land that is vacant currently or had could be subdivided within the concept of the longer term zoning that we'll talk about in a moment. So you could get 33 new dwelling units in the current exception areas that are vacant and unconstrained, so they don't have things like floodplain on them. And then, of course, we're showing the commercial and the industrial areas in sort of a maroon, and then the blues are commercial and industrial. If you reverted to the previous zoning that Hood River had before 2000, that would allow about 126 units within ODELL. In the areas that are the light orange and the dark orange, those are zoned for smaller types of development. I think those are like 2.5 acre and maybe half acre. I can't remember the exact zoning thing. I can't see it on the screen either. But those are zoned for big lots. Not quite as big as 2 acres, but still big lots. If you took some of those areas that are in orange and made them your R1 zone, which is a 7,500 square foot lot, that would allow you about 237 dwelling units in ODELL. And we've talked in the little bullet here, it assumes sort of a mixture of things like single unit, detached, duplex, triplex, quadplex, maybe some townhouses, maybe a multifamily building or two. They would be small, like 2-story multifamily. We're not talking about anything big here. In addition to your single unit detached. So allow a little more mixture of housing types, which can give you more opportunities for renting, And some of these are things that the owner could live in and rent the other half of, such as a duplex. So that was part of what we assumed in the analysis that we did in phase one, just looking at the existing land in Odell. You can also see, Scott, will you point with your pointer to the area between the two exceptions areas? So there's the fundamental problem that Odell is in two pieces. And how do you join them so that you have a community that is connected? That's a fundamental question. Before I go on, do you guys have any questions about that?
Yes.
Is the methodology on how you came up with the, and I'm sorry if it's in the packet, I just didn't, lot to digest there.
Yeah, there is.
Okay, it is in the packet of the duplex, triplex, quadplex, townhouse, SFR mix.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, it is. And those would be definitely a minority of housing types. It would just be allowing some and assuming, I can't remember the exact percentage. I want to say 20% of new housing might be one of those types of housing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this is essentially an analysis of what's the capacity of land that is vacant in your existing exceptions area under certain assumptions about a little bit of rezoning for your R2.5 R1/2. So if we go on to the next slide. So here in green, we've added in the areas that might become part of the Odell boundary. So the areas there, if we assumed that area 2B and 2C were zoned with that R1, so 7,500 square foot lots, and allowed that similar mix of different types of housing, you might end up with about 300 additional units, a little more than that. And then area 2A and 3 would be zoned, at least temporarily, much larger lot sizes, assuming that they could be rezoned sometime in the future to allow additional growth in those areas, zone something similar to the 7,500 lot size, square foot lots. So we're not talking about lots that are really different in terms of sizes than are already in Odell.
We have a question, Beth.
What does the dark gray represent?
The dark gray are constraints. So those are things like floodplain, steep slopes, that kind of thing. The lighter gray is just area outside of the existing Odell area or the area that we're proposing as potentially part of the community. And I'll get to you in a moment, Sarah. I didn't mention area 1. That's where you've got one of your schools in the fairground. That's proposed for inclusion. Sorry, I was forgetting about that. And then area 4 is an area where you've got some publicly owned utilities and land, including land that I think it's Crystal Springs that owns that, and that's what the vacant land is there. No housing would be presumed either for area 1 or area 4. Sarah, you have a question.
Thank you, Beth. I was looking at my notes from phase 1 and looking at, you have 313, and I was looking at 250 dwellings or additional units in 2B and C. Can you clarify the difference in the uptick in numbers?
It's actually not a change in numbers from what we had in the first phase. It may be that you have some numbers that are a little bit older.
Okay.
Areas 2 and 3 would have, I don't know, something like 5 or 10 of those units in it. It's a very small number.
No, I understand that, but 2B I have 232 and 2C I have 18. So that gets me to 250.
2C, we considered 2C differently later in the project.
Great,
So
thank you.
Yeah, if you look at the final report from phase 1, you would see all of that. Certainly.
And this includes 2A and 3 as well.
It does.
I understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, one more question. Does this include the new FEMA floodplain maps?
No. It includes the floodplain maps that we had, unless Eric says we had the new FEMA floodplain maps.
And if they are, it doesn't include the new ones, does it change the equation much?
Well, I'm sorry, Beth, let me take that.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, we did have access to FEMA's preliminary flood maps, and so what's shown there is the new FEMA flood maps.
Oh.
Are they the exact same as what was that's ultimately going to be presented to the board for adoption? There might be some very, very minor tweaks to it, but it should be representative of what the new maps look like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for correcting me there, Eric. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Are there other questions before we go on?
Nope.
So to putting all of that together, we're talking about 540 additional dwelling units in the in what would be the ODELL community based on this boundary. So then on the next slide, please, Scott. So then we were talking to your water district, and they've got about, I'm just going to call it a little less than 800 household equivalents that they serve. Most of them are households, and a few of them are commercial industrial areas. Beyond that, they told us they have about capacity for about 781 new dwelling units. It would require some capital improvements, and by that I mean it would require some upgrades to some existing pipes. They may be too small, or putting in some new pipes, but it's not about a substantial change in the water district's big facilities, so water treatment, that kind of thing. So that would require some new pipes, essentially. The sanitary district told us that they have capacity to accommodate about 1,000 more dwelling unit equivalents with minimal capital improvements. So again, they would require some new collector pipes, that kind of thing, probably some other capital improvements. But they think that that's well within what they're planning on over the next decade and longer. We had some transportation planners who looked at the highways and tested capacity to serve the existing units. And they found that the intersections that you see there would all be able to accommodate that additional traffic. Not that there wouldn't be more traffic, but they would all be able to accommodate it at current standards. And the schools, without any changes in their existing facilities, could accommodate about 409 new households. Of course, not all new households would have children at it, children with them. So that's a little bit squishier, but it'd be important as the city, as the county works on this plan and begins to implement this plan, whatever the boundary is, that it's coordinating with the different service providers to make sure that there's updated plans, that kind of thing. And that includes coordinating with the schools. Sarah, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. For the Crystal Springs and ODELL Sanitary District, are we factoring in growth from businesses in that?
There would be additional amount of some of that would be growth from businesses. So in other words, we're talking about 500. Yeah, we're talking about we haven't modeled growth from businesses, but if you're talking about 540 new dwelling units and you've got 781 dwelling unit equivalents, that leaves you 240 dwelling unit equivalent increases for water, and I believe that they currently have about 67 dwelling unit equivalents for commercial and industrial uses. So it's well within what you've got now.
I recall an 80% threshold for a new plan of one of the districts. Is that coming into play?
There are some complexities with that, and I don't have all of that loaded into my head right now, but there is a point at which the water and the sewer district would both need to do some updated plans and do a little more intense planning. I think the more intense planning coordination with the county would begin very, very early. And eventually they would need to look at doing some upgrades. But with the kind of growth we're talking about, even with more industrial and commercial growth, we wouldn't be triggering that 80% threshold.
Thank you. And one final question, or just something to flag. The school district is going through a long-range facility planning currently. So I really think the capacity should really in coordination or worked with in coordination with them, because I know some of their plans could be building a new school. So I want to make sure that that's flagged.
Eric, I assume that you have connection with the school district in coordination with them.
Yes. So we did contact and spoke with the school superintendent as part of phase one to get these numbers. And then we have those connections, and we can, as part of the conversation with the superintendent, he mentioned that they were going to be going out for this evaluation of facilities and doing a planning work. And so, as Beth said, these numbers are the best that they can provide. Certainly approximate, but we can certainly touch base with them again and just make sure that nothing has changed over the last 2 years. One more question.
Well, I guess an assumption, the schools include White East and the elementary school.
That's correct.
Combination.
Yes.
On the highways, is there money in the grant to do a traffic study? Since we just came off of a project that was very traffic study heavy.
So the answer is no, we do not. We had money as part of phase one to do an initial traffic assessment. It was fairly low scale, basically looking at the amount of traffic numbers at certain intersections. And then they, in their modeling, were able to determine, based on the number of units proposed, what would the level of service at those intersections be. So that was the extent of that traffic study. Doing anything beyond that is not part of the budget for this. That work was done under phase one.
Okay, one more question, actually.
Yes.
Or maybe there's another slide that hits on, like the fire, Vice Fire Department, did they chime in on their ability to accommodate more houses?
We did not talk to the fire department as through this project. There's an awful lot of additional planning work that would need to be done as the county was implementing and beyond that, working with the fire department. So no, and that's also important. Obviously, in light of some of the wildfires we've been having.
We can certainly have those discussions as well.
Eric,
Yes.
if this were to get developed, would any house being proposed, if you go through planning department review, would that have to have White Fire sign off?
Absolutely. Any development that happens.
And that's probably why it's not included, because it's part of the process already.
It is built into the development process, but certainly we would want to make sure that they understand it. And I'm pretty sure that we have notified them of this process. But they weren't on our list to explicitly talk to and say, hey, what's this going to look like? And we can certainly do that.
But as I guess each individual house gets proposed, it will get the sign off from the fire department. Yes, we have capacity and it meets our standards. And that, so I guess it is already being addressed somewhere else in the land use process.
Yes, but that comes, later on in the process. But yes, they are definitely involved in every land use application that we process that involves new buildings.
Are there other questions before I go on?
Nope.
Okay. So, in thinking about this, this is a long range plan. And so thinking, and we'll be talking long range stuff in a few minutes. The urban unincorporated community plan should, establish an ODELL community specific plan that's shaped by residents, workers, and businesses. So it establishes a process for specifically planning for ODELL in which, beyond the plan, but implementing that plan. A lot of the times the real interesting part is in implementing the plans, so the specific zoning, etc. For residents, workers, and businesses, looking at your existing infrastructure, which is really oversized for the community you have currently, because when it was, I think, established, it was expected that Odell would grow into a larger community faster than it has. Of course, we're looking at ongoing agricultural activities. We'll look at a map about that in a few minutes. As we have looked at what the potential boundaries of Odell are, one of the primary criteria was about not disrupting ongoing orchard activity. That's very important in Odell for obvious reasons. Recognizing that Odell, for as small a place as it is a regional employment center. And a lot of workers commute into the community. And part of the reason for that is probably that there's very little rental housing. There's very little affordable ownership housing. And part of how you solve that, this won't entirely solve it, but is allowing for more housing development and allowing for a wider range of housing development, so a little different types. The schools continue to be an important community anchor, and they have capacity for additional households. And the quality of life, one way that the community plan could really enhance this is about supporting more housing choices, looking at opportunities for safer transportation and other types of community connections and services that help people remain in Odell. So how does Odell become essentially a more complete community than it is? So I'm going to go on to one more slide and we're almost done talking at you guys. So looking at the constraints for Odell as an unincorporated community, we've essentially said one of the constraints, one of the sets of constraints is about orchards. There was a lot of discussion about where there are currently orchards and where there aren't orchards. And so the county made us this map that shows the orchards as the green things. I suspect they look like little trees. That's the orchard lands. You can see the existing exceptions areas in I'll just call it red area. And then the different options for inclusion are in purple and in orange. So again, we've got a current state law that that has a minimum 2-acre lot size because Odell is not an official urban unincorporated community. And you don't have an acknowledged boundary, and you're surrounded by EFU lands, exclusive farm use lands. So on the next slide. So the criteria for evaluating the potential boundary is we're thinking the boundary should have a logical boundary around the existing community, where you've got development and where you've got public facilities. Include land that can be planned and served consistently within Oregon's requirements for an urban unincorporated community. Be supported by legal findings. So in other words, we have to be able to make the case to the state that there are good reasons for asking for exceptions. Will you slide back to the last slide? Exceptions for areas 1, all 3 of the 2s, area 3 and 4. So we're going to have to make a case for, legal exceptions for all of those areas. And then on to the next 2 slides. The boundary should provide sufficient housing capacity to give opportunities for reasonable long-term growth, use existing infrastructure capacity efficiently while considering future service costs, minimize impact on productive agricultural land, reflect community priorities, and support zoning and development patterns that are appropriate for Odell's character and scale. So we're not talking about something that's fundamentally different than what Odell is currently. And on to the next one. So as Eric mentioned, we've got 2 potential boundary options. Boundary A is on the left. It includes fewer areas than boundary B. Boundary B basically is the same thing as, sorry, option B is the same thing as option A, plus adding area 3 and adding to area 2A. And what we're currently working towards is findings about option B, and the Board of Commissioners will be giving us direction about which boundary to use in the unincorporated community plan. So I'm happy to have any comments that you have on the criteria that we just talked about, especially, or the boundaries.
One thing I'd like to add in regard to the differences between the two boundaries, and it's important to note as we talk about final numbers of potential housing units, depending on whether option A is chosen or option B. At the end of the day, whether option A or B are chosen, the number of housing units will be very similar because areas 2A and 3 are designated. Right now, there is a requirement under the administrative rule that says that if you have a community such as Odell that is located within 10 miles of an urban growth boundary, once you set your boundary, you are prohibited from expanding it in the future. And so our board, as Beth noted earlier, we started this process in 2002. We developed the community plan in 2004. And you might be asking, well, why haven't we adopted a plan yet, 20 years later? And part of this has to do with this 10-mile rule, because our board is looking at this as like, if the ODEL only has one opportunity to set a boundary, we want to make sure that there's some land built in within that boundary that can accommodate some potential future growth down the road. So that when area, say 2B and 2C gets fully developed, there's still an area to grow into, because again, we have one shot at developing this boundary. And so area 2A and 3 is really committed to be more of a, we'll call it kind of an urban reserve area for development. That it's intended at this moment in time to be zoned some with lower density. So let's just say you zone it, say an RR 10 acres. So property that's in there, it's already less than 10 acres. It can't be divided further. Each of those 10 acres has one house. So it's really not going to accommodate any new housing. But it's an area that we know we can grow into in the future. So I want to give you that distinction between the two boundaries.
Eric, why is there just one shot at this?
Yeah, because right now the administrative rule says, well, the intent is, the administrative rule says boundaries, existing unincorporated communities within 10 miles cannot be expanded. And so I think the reason for that is to, again, as I mentioned earlier, the idea under the Oregon Land Use Planning Program is to focus development within our cities. And so what the state is intending to minimize are these bedroom communities, where you have these places where you have these unincorporated communities that serve as bedroom communities. And then there's, but everybody, works outside. And so it's a bedroom community for the city. In this case, Odell is unique in the fact that it has both housing, but it also has industry. And so it can be looked at a little bit differently, but that's the intent of this 10-mile rule. It's based on the size of the urban area. So larger cities, there's a greater distance. So it's actually a 20-mile rule. It's called a distance prohibition is another way to.
When the discussion is this like long-term future plan for Odell, and nothing's, even if we were to set this in the spring, these folks that own these lots would have to sell or develop or what, it's very long-term plan, especially when you talk about 2A and 3. And so with that thought in mind, why, and I can appreciate that you're not trying to take tree production out of tree production, but you're taking farmland out of farmland. So why are you not just choosing the most opportune farmlands that make the most sense for the density, regardless of whether they're in tree production or not tree production? If we're trying to look at 20, 30 years on the road, we don't know what these farmers are doing. And to me, it seems like you should just set the boundary that makes the most sense for the boundary, for the sewer district, for the water, for all the things. And then those are your boundaries, and that's up to the farmer whether they want to rip out their trees, just like it's up to Patricia Derrick if she wants to sell her lot to the people behind her or developer. Like I guess that's my question.
Sure, good question. So as we talked about, the county is going to have to go through an exceptions process. And within the exceptions process, there's a lot of elements to that that we have to justify. And so through that exceptions process, we have to, one, justify that there's a need. What you will see in meetings, in future meetings, are that, we have maps showing the location of sewer lines and water lines, and so we kind of have a sense of where those are located to maybe best serve development should it happen. Two, there's a lot of value put on high value farmland, productive farmland. And certainly that can be interpreted a lot of different ways. Just because something is orchard, does it have greater value than something that's in hay production? In our valley, we put a high value on orchard trees. And so what we attempted through this process is to try to minimize the impacts of those orchard lands. And I think it creates an argument that we can make to the state when we're making these exceptions that, hey, we did the best we could to connect these two dissected areas of our community to make them connected. Obviously, the areas that we're talking about, the 2B, 2C, those areas are necessary in order to connect the two existing exception areas. And so, looking to the east, for instance, that really doesn't achieve the purpose of trying to connect those two areas. And so it would be harder for us to justify, expanding maybe in that direction. We have a good argument based on that. So is there more to add, Scott or Beth?
I would add to that just if you go big on something like this, like much bigger than what we've gone, it becomes harder and harder to justify to the state. And so we're trying to tread a line of address what can be done closer to now, even though it's several years down the line before development starts happening, and provide some expansion for the future for the community, without essentially causing problems and making I won't call it a mistake in 2004, but repeating that pattern of something that's just not going to get through the state. So
yeah, I think that's important to note is that in 2004, again in 2012, when we proposed, we were looking at larger boundaries than just this. This was considered a smaller boundary. And so when we were looking at those larger boundaries, the state was very clear in saying, we don't think you can justify that. And so that caused us to kind of put it on hold. But I think as time has gone by, we've looked at this and said, well, we need to at least adopt something. And then if we need to later on through a legislative process or some other mechanism to try to adjust the 10-mile rule so that maybe we can expand in the future, then we can do that now. But we need to adopt the plan today so that we can at least provide some opportunities for housing development in this area.
Well, and that was going to be my question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay,
I think you've been going.
No.
I think one of the what I keep hearing is that it seems almost like whatever plan we go to is like, it almost seems like the way it's being proposed, like this is the final thing, right? But it sounds like outside of that, there is other steps and changes and other options to be able to expand that if needed. It's just more complicated to get to that point, right? Because you say you have to go through a legislative process to be able to make those changes.
Yeah,
but
it's a tough sell to be able to change the rule, but
yeah, but outside of that, what would be another opportunity just through the existing laws and rules that exist that might allow for changes. Again, if, let's just say hypothetically, farmers decided that they wanted to sell their land in the future or do something different with it, and that would expand the opportunity for housing. Like, is there other things in existence right now without having to go through all that process that would allow for something like that to happen without being dinged for like losing their EFU zoning, you dinged on those assessments and those taxes that, you know, will make a significant change to those property values and their taxes.
Sure.
Um,
So to answer that question, there really isn't. I mean, based on the Oregon statewide planning program, areas that are designated exclusive farm use or forest, they're highly protected. There's an extensive process and a justification that's required to change those. That's what we're having to go through as part of this process. And we think that we can make a pretty good argument for a zone change in this particular instance. If it wasn't related to this ODELL unincorporated community plan project, I would say it'd be very difficult in order to make that justification. But because of the factors that we've talked about and other items that will come up as we move on, we think that that's a good case that we can justify an exception in this case, even though it's a tough sell in many regards.
But Juan, what you could do is if it was incorporated into the boundary and say it was 2.5 acre lots, you could, with it, if it's already within that boundary, you could then rezone for smaller lots.
Yeah, and that's kind of what my thought was, and I think we kind of alluded to that, is like, why not go big in the sense of having that option at least when making that decision, and then this rezoning as appropriate as the community sees is needed in the future.
And
That's what areas 2A and 3 are for. They're for allowing the county to rezone them later as appropriate, and allow more capacity in those areas beyond what we've talked about today. I want to also mention that Sarah has her hand up at some point.
Great. And I think it's also important to note that the dark orange area up there, it's currently zoned rural residential 2.5 acre. The current proposal would be to maintain that at rural residential 2.5 acres. So that's another area that in the future, when the time comes and there's a need, that could be an area that could be converted to a higher density without having to expand the boundary any further.
And that's an area that's a little less well served either by water or sewer or both. I can't quite remember off the top of my head.
Let's go to Sarah and then we'll go to John.
Okay, thank you, Eric. You addressed 3 with the future zoning, but how about 2A? At the RR5, I recall in phase 1, there was not enough buffer potentially in that area. Could it be potentially hold houses now, and how would that affect nearby orchards?
Will you go back a few slides, Scott? To the orchard slide. There we go. So there are orchards right up against 2A.
But we are looking at that at a lower density, like a rural residential 5 or 10. So it essentially would be brought into the boundary, but would effectively not result in any development in the short term.
And so what the county might choose to do sometime later, Sarah, is look at allowing more density, more units down along the road. I think that's Summit Road, but I could be totally wrong. That's between 2A and 2B, and allowing less up along the edges to create that buffer.
Right, so I guess my question right now is, with those 3 dwelling units at RR5, do we feel there's enough of a buffer?
5 acre lots. It's I'm not sure. I would leave that to Eric a little bit, and that's a certain amount of the next step, I think, looking at some of the zoning issues.
I just asked for that one to be considered because I know there was an issue with that buffer in 2A. I don't want it to go against the goals. Thank you.
And we've got a few questions for you guys in a few moments that we're hoping for you to answer once you've gotten your question satisfied.
Okay, John?
Is it possible to see what the 2002 and the 2012 iteration of this look like when we were rejected by the state? I guess that's the first question, because we've seen a 62% population increase since 2002. And it seems to me like our justification for going bigger has only gotten stronger in the last 20 years. And so to reduce that one-time opportunity to increase the area as we face more housing constraints and more economic constraints seems really counterintuitive. And I would think that with what we've seen, the state would be more supportive to a larger boundary now than they would have 20 years ago. I guess that's the first question. The second one is like number 4 just seems like I'm thinking of geographic boundaries. Like it's easy to make the case for adding an area when it has at least 2 boundaries that touch for continuity. But then I look at number 4 and I'm like, God, that's just kind of out there. So,
Area 4 is really to allow Crystal Springs to develop their land for their new facility.
Okay, well, and also Hood River Electric Co-op,
Yeah,
East Fork Irrigation District, they've already developed, it's built, it's committed to industrial development.
Because it's irrevocably committed, right?
Exactly. So
Okay,
to be honest, it's a
different.
no-brainer. It's probably out of all the exceptions, that's probably one of the easier ones.
Okay, got it. On the topic of we're seeing all these more additional housing constraints, we've increased our population by 62%. What did it look like 10 years ago? What did it look like 20 years ago? And who are the decision makers at the state that said, no, you can't do that?
Well, I think in talking with, the latest state folks, again, that is a factor. Removing land out of EFU is a tough sell. We think that we've made that the state has never given us the nod that yes, this is a guarantee approval, but they have said that we think that you have a pretty good case given what you're proposing today. If you go beyond that, I think it's less so. And so we have to look at one is, and the Board of Commissioners has spent a lot of time, analyzing the maps and trying to determine and understanding that we have one shot at this. And with all that said, I think that what is being proposed now is probably our best opportunity to be successful. And going beyond that, we've already tried that twice. It didn't go very well. I don't believe that things have changed enough in order to get us in a better position to justify it. And so I think this is probably the best that we can do at the moment. And then work our, as needed. Again, we have to be able to justify that there's enough facilities to accommodate the growth. And so the more land that you get in, the harder that argument is made, that there is adequate public facilities to accommodate that now.
Okay, and then one other question. What is the process if we go to the state and the state says, we don't know, they just say no? What happens then? Do we keep that one-time boundary adjustment on the table? Do we totally screw ourselves in another way? Like, what's the process? What's the plan B in case this doesn't work?
Well, let's just put it this way. The state has funded this project twice. And my guess is if they thought it was set for failure, they wouldn't have given us the grant to pursue forward. I mean, they've been working with us very closely on this proposal. And even though they can't give any guarantees, it's outside of their control. At the end of the day, it's the Land Conservation and Development Commission, the commission that ultimately approves this. And it's subject to appeals process as well. So there's no guarantees, but this is a plan that everybody has kind of like said, it seems like you can make a good case for.
And then if it goes to the DLCD, and it doesn't get approved, what happens?
Then at that point, we have to reassess and we go to phase 3.
The last 20 years. Okay.
Yes.
So I would assume that most of the orchard ground around this proposed boundary is labeled as high value, meaning class 1 and 2 soils, or majority class 1 and 2 soils. We heard, I believe, the landowner of number 3 testify that he can't earn a living off that property at all, and wet soils and haying and all these other problems with water retention, and it could never be orchard anyways. Do we know if that one is labeled as non-high value farmland, meaning majority of the soils are?
Right. Everything is around Odell is high value farmland. There's no getting around it based on the soil quality.
Yeah.
But what you find is that there are some areas, probably, I think all of those areas, probably the reason that they don't have orchard is they're in a frost pocket or they have other factors that, whether it be wet or whatever, but the soils themselves are good around the entire area. So we're dealing with high value farmland no matter
No
what.
matter what. Okay. Thank you.
Beth, do we need to move things along onto the questions?
I think it would be helpful because we're hoping to have some answers to some of those questions.
And just as a reminder, we're trying to get out by 7:30. So
Yep.
I will probably speed us along quickly through this. So this is what I'd mentioned. I was a teacher before, and I always like to do my preflection activities to get us thinking, but we have already been through this. Let's spend 30 seconds or so, we can get through this quickly, of some time thinking about what Odell's greatest strength is, one thing Odell needs over the next 20 years, and one thing this plan should protect. And then we've got our discussion questions for conversation. But this is meant to be a moment of gather your thoughts about this, and we will move into larger open discussion.
Anybody needs paper?
Teacher side of me would have been giving these out ahead of time and scolding people for talking, but we're short on time today. And so teacher side of me also says we can be flexible. So I will push us forward. Here are the main discussion questions that we have, many of which you all have already started to address.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're slow learners. Anybody need pen? Oh.
Well, I will do my teacher thing and give everyone a 30-second warning to finish up before we move on to discussion. Okay. So that was meant to get you thinking about some of the major things we want addressing. We have some slightly more targeted questions for discussion here. We can bounce around between these, but I will quick go through them. We'll start at the top and we'll let conversation happen naturally to address these to the best of our ability. I will make sure that the crucial ones are getting addressed. So what does Odell need to be a more complete community over the next 20 years? What should the urban unincorporated community plan protect or preserve? What opportunities and concerns do you see with the proposed boundary options? What housing challenges should the urban unincorporated community plan help address? And 10 years from now, what would have happened for you to say this plan was successful? I will suggest we start at the top, but we can go in any direction that folks want as well. This is
I'd say
discussion time.
we're most interested in the top 3 questions, if you have thoughts about them.
See a hand up from Sarah?
I'm gonna start with what should the plan protect or preserve, and I think we need to protect the employment, in the community to make sure that they're sustainable and viable.
Eric, we'll be relying on you to sort of guide the conversation a little in person.
To that subject, I think it's important to protect the small community feeling and vibe. And I feel like that's been a big one for the adult people who already live there.
I would second character of community, and preserving that little special thing that makes Odell what it is, which is not giant mansions and blue collar people who can just afford to be.
And I would say piggybacking on that is we talk about affordability. I mean, just because they're going to be the capacity to build more homes, it doesn't mean that community members will actually be able to afford to go into those homes. So one model that that had popped into my head as something that's been happening with Columbia Cascade Housing is the land trust model, where it allows potential community members to be able to get in a home and start building equity. Because yes, we can build more homes, but if the people that have a lot of the income to be able to buy those, then it's still pushing out the local community members that can't afford to actually move into those homes.
If I can jump in on that.
Beth, you're muted.
I'm very, very concerned about in the traditional tools you have in a plan of zoning and density, you can get partway there. But if we really want affordable housing, we have to stretch the boundaries of what any of us in this county are comfortable doing. And the land trust is certainly one way to get started there. The phase one plan has some other options as well. And I really hope that as part of the process, we can discuss which of those options are feasible and can be recommended to the Board of Commissioners.
And so, as you mentioned, that is some of those options like land trust are mentioned in phase one. I don't think phase two here we're going to get to the discussion of those things, but that's part of what would come in after you've adopted your unincorporated community boundary and plan. Those are all the implementation things you need to do what you guys are talking about affordable housing for people to live and work there.
Although the hope would be that through this planning process and the development of zoning and minimum lot sizes, that it doesn't prevent those things from happening, that those opportunities exist. We can't force that through zoning, but at least we've provided a mechanism with which if somebody from the land trust said, hey, we would like to do this type of thing, that the zoning would be accommodating to that type of development.
And I would hope that as part of this phase, if it's the wish of this advisory committee to speak to that issue, I hope we have a chance to do that. Even though it's just setting the stage for future work.
Great.
I think there can be space for that.
Can I start another one of those bullet points?
Yes, we've got 15 minutes.
In 20 years, I think a more complete community would also have more commercial, social, and health services than it does now. In my lifetime, I've seen the downtown of Odell really like shrink in what's available. Groceries, restaurants, gas, like all that stuff is really contracted. And I think having that as we're planning for more housing is important.
Well, I think in a complete community also, we need to look at housing versus affordable housing, right? A complete community doesn't include all of affordable, whatever that number may be, housing. It includes a vast array of housings and lot sizes. And so I think that's something that we need to focus on as well. It's not just necessarily whatever we may deem as affordable housing, which in all reality it probably isn't affordable anyway.
But for attainable housing.
Well,
And I would put it housing that is affordable to people who live and work in Odell. So we're not talking about necessarily income restricted housing only, but other types of housing that is relatively affordable, as well as other types of housing in the market. will build.
Sarah?
Just flagging healthcare would be an amazing asset to Odell to make it a complete community.
I'll say it, which would piggyback on John's a little bit, would be a bit more focused, especially if you're going to provide more people coming into Odell. If you are providing healthcare and more businesses and all these things, is a bigger concern for safety in the roads in Odell. Right now, we have, I've spoke on this before, we have no crosswalks in Odell. Kids have a really hard time walking or biking to school. That's a big part of the walk to school program. And I think more people coming down Odell Highway at the Summit intersection or even Highway 35 or all those major intersections is kind of asking for more accidents, and then also the safety of the farmers on tractors and people being aware that we still are in a farming community and we need to be on the lookout for farm workers driving equipment and continuing to do their jobs.
Well, my hope would be with increased housing, increased tax revenue for the community itself, it would lend itself to increased support for infrastructure, I would guess. Now, one of the things that I was thinking about in the next 20 or even 10 years, I would love to see a comparable educational infrastructure for the schools comparable to what we see in the city. I think that disparity has always been the big conversation the community has always had, that there's more opportunities as you get closer to the city as you are outside of that area. But my hope would be by increasing density, allowing for more homes, allowing for more tax revenue to stay in that area, that money could stay there and help the community grow as the need is increased. Sidewalks would be great.
For reference, one thing I might suggest right now is I will pop back over to the boundary maps so that we can be thinking in particular this question, what opportunities and concerns do you see with the proposed boundary options? So if I scooch back here so that you can see those while you talk about them, that can also be helpful.
So some of what we heard a few minutes ago was discussion about concerns with going too small with option B. And we also heard concerns about protecting the surrounding agricultural land.
Okay.
I'd like to go back to a concern about Area 3 that was raised during the first phase, which was if you set it for RR10, for example, and it's subdivided into 10-acre lots, what is the county's experience with later coming in and taking 10-acre lots and then further subdividing? Or have you created a situation where you have a bunch of little mini ranches with people that are buying the large lots? And they might not be interested in. So have you really gained anything in terms of housing, even though you're calling it kind of a land bank?
And that's a good question. I'll just quickly answer that. Right now, the lots that exist are at least are less than 20 acres. I mean, there might be tracts, but the individual parcels that exist are less than 20 acres, so they wouldn't be that opportunity to divide. But what could happen under that scenario can already happen today.
How many acres is lot 3 or roughly?
Area 3, I believe, and correct if I'm wrong, is around 50 acres.
50, okay, same about 50.
Area 3 is 51 acres. Area 2 is about 33, 2B is 33, 2C is 10, and 2A is 14. And that's how much land is unconstrained. They're actually a little bigger than that, but we're just talking about unconstrained land. Sarah, you have your hand up?
Just as a point of reference, in phase one, there was not much opposition for 2B and C. There was a decent amount of opposition for 2A and 3. So just something that we need to continue to think about.
Yeah, there were certainly concerns about 2A and 3. There were also questions about why not bring in some other areas. And some of that I think we've exactly right up there. We've answered through looking at maps of where you've got existing orchards.
Burke Hill and Lindgren was another area that we looked at as a potential.
Yeah, Lindgren would like pop into my head just because of density. And it's close to the existing neighborhood.
Sorry if I missed this. Do we get the option to modify B if we want to? Or is it all or nothing?
Right now, see the challenge that we're having is, we went through phase one process and these were the boundary options that the board basically gave a nod to. If we change those now, then it changes the scope of our project. And now we have to do goal exceptions for these other lands.
I was thinking like if we did option B minus 2A, because 2A seems like it's one of those ones that's controversial.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I see. Yeah, that's certainly an option because right now what we're going to do is if we're moving forward with an exception for all 2A through 3, so that we can present that to the board and then the board can do with it as they want. They could say, well, we just want 2A, 2B and C, or we want 2B and C and 3, but not A, so there is that option. But I guess what I was looking at was if you want to do something other than those green areas.
The board, okay. Board's gonna do what they're gonna do anyway.
They're the final decision.
Right.
We're just advice.
Something that's just coming to mind is as the conversation is going, and yes, I agree with what has already been mentioned about road safety, especially when our kids are going to school or walking to school, and like I know there's the speed limits, but unfortunately not everyone respects that. But yes, more sidewalks or like, I don't know if this would make it even. If it would add more barriers to like having some sidewalks, lights, or I'm also thinking about like the intersection of, I believe it's Summit Drive and the Odell Highway, and like if there can be, I don't know what traffic support would be needed there. But then also in terms of housing, in order for it to be like like a complete like what would be a great town would be how do we ensure there's gonna be, build like for example, building new houses, various houses, but like how can we ensure that because there's a younger age in Odell, how can we ensure that the younger population is able to purchase these homes instead of other people like you've seen in Hood River, city of Hood River, or like in the Dells, that people with big more money are coming to do rentals. So I think
that is something that we are looking at. What we did in the park on the corporate community plan is we we allowed accessory dwelling units, which is kind of a small house tied to another house. And we said that short-term rental, that accessory dwelling units cannot be used for short-term rental. Right now, short-term rentals are allowed in the county, and the boards can certainly take another crack at that if they wanted to limit some of that, or maybe they limit it in the Odell area. That's certainly an option. for them.
And then, sorry, then just one more that I had was, where, there would definitely be more infrastructure needed for this growth. But then how could Odell support more local, small-owned businesses instead of bringing in, from other cities or states, larger, I guess that's one concern is, there's this growth gonna be happening and will that be kind of like an opportunity for other larger companies or other known brands to come in and kind of take on or settle in
McDonald's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tough one because by zoning, we can't, through zoning, you can't be explicit in restricting certain businesses or certain, you can't have in your zoning ordinance that, all retail establishments except for Walmart and Target or something like that. That just doesn't work. That's against the law. So yeah, it makes it tough on how do you allow opportunities, but at the same time, be able to restrict certain types of businesses. And I'm not sure, but I think that's really.
And so one thing the county might want to consider doing is, as part of implementation of this is a little bit of economic development planning. It would be you'd have policies in your unincorporated community plan that would support some of what you're talking about there about small businesses, as well as local businesses. And then look at some economic development planning. What are the opportunities? What would the county need to do to bring in some of these other services, for instance?
Great. So we're running into the 7:30 hour. Any final thoughts, Beth and Scott?
Thank you for being here, for caring and for expressing your concerns. Some of this will probably show up in some of the policies that we'll be working on a little bit later in the project. And some of it will show up in what we're talking to the Board of Commissioners about. So some of it is a little longer term, after the unincorporated community plan, but it shouldn't be lost, is what I'm saying.
So next steps, unless there's anything else, Beth and Scott. As noted in an earlier slide, we are going to have 3 more advisory committee meetings as this process continues. I'd like to invite you all to the community open house on was it 28th Monday. So we'll get you the notices of that. So if you'd like to participate, we'd love to have you. And so that's the next thing on the docket. So
fill in the survey if you receive it, and encourage your family and friends to do so. And I guess if you don't receive it, maybe talk to Eric.
Well, too, there's a few of us that are not ODELL residents, and so we're looking for the input of ODELL residents primarily. Right. So
fair. Sorry. Don't stuff the ballot box.
No.
Eric, last thing,
Yes.
You're going to poll the commissioners about meeting availability on the 23rd.
Yes. Okay. We'll do that. Before we show. Okay. Anything else, Beth and Scott?
Thank you.
Great questions. Appreciate all of the local knowledge and passion for it. This is exactly the sort of group that we want to be going through this process with. So,
great.
Good job.
Thank you all. Before the planning commission leaves, before we settle, we have a planning commission meeting scheduled for
23rd.
The September 23rd, and we just wanted to make sure that to see who could make it that night and who's unable to make it, so we can make sure we have quorum.
Is it the appeal hearing?
The appeal hearing, yes, on the 23rd.
Yep. 5:30.
5:30, yeah.
Eric, you want to go ahead and stop the recording?
You can stop the recording, yes.
If I'm not available in person, I can be